I can show you the door, the door, the door. I can show you the door, the door.
So track 4 of this album is called The Door, and there's a particular story that we're going to revisit through the songs, and you can find that in Joshua 7 and Hosea 2. So in Joshua 7, the nation is under the leadership of Joshua taking all of this territory that the Lord had promised to them, right? Which traces back to Abraham. Abraham falls asleep, wakes up in a covenant. You know, there's more to it, obviously, but Genesis 12, Genesis 15. And the Lord says to him in Genesis 15, know surely that your children, that'll be, you know, more innumerable than the stars, which is another thing that's threaded throughout the prophetic testimony, that the Lord places the witness of the cosmos as collateral, basically, for this covenant that he's cut with Abraham, for the everlasting covenant, which is the new covenant in Jeremiah 31, but we'll get to that later. He says, know certainly that your children will go into slavery in a foreign nation for 400 years, and then I will bring them out and I'll bring them into the land. So they're there for 430 years because Joseph and his family and then the nation. 430 years, he sends Moses, and Moses leads the nation from Egypt towards the promised land, right? And then Moses is not able to go. And so they come in under the leadership of Joshua, and they are victorious every step of the way. Every battle they're winning, like by a landslide. It's like magnificent. It's a sign and it's a wonder, truly. And then they are crippled in their first defeat. And so Joshua seeks the Lord and says, what happened? This is Joshua 7. And the Lord says, you have somebody in your midst, like this nation is guilty. There's somebody in your midst who plundered from that last battle and kept things they were forbidden to keep. And so you lost because you're guilty. You as a nation are guilty before me. And so they find that it was Achan who did this. He buried all this stuff under his tent. And Achan and his whole family were stoned to death that day, like buried under a pile of stones. And it was humiliating. Obviously, it was, you know, to lose this battle. But as a nation, it was the first taste of compromise in that generation that crippled the nation. Like, since, you know, they haven't known that kind of infidelity or discipline since the golden calf incident. So later in Hosea 2, the Lord is saying, the story of Hosea is magnificent. When the word of the Lord first came to Hosea, he said, go marry a prostitute. It's very dramatic. Like, if anybody had heard that, you know, the word of the Lord first comes to you and it's that, the Lord would have had to have communicated it in a very special way so that Hosea knew it wasn't pizza and it wasn't the devil, it was the Lord. And so he does. And it's this dynamic story that the Lord points to illuminate his relationship with Israel. And again, in his relationship with Israel, you can learn about his character and how he treats you. And so in Hosea 2, the Lord is speaking ultimately about the day of the Lord, the end of this age, the transition into the next age, the wedding feast, Isaiah 26, all this beautiful stuff, you know, towards Revelation 21, 22. And he says, you're up to your eyeballs in compromise. You're going home with all these other guys. You are like as unfaithful as they come. So I'm going to hedge you in so that you can't chase anybody else. And then I will allure you into the wilderness, and I will remind you of our history, and I'll speak tenderly to you, and you will sing there as you did in your youth in Egypt when you crossed the Red Sea, on the shores of the Red Sea. So this is one of those motifs, those stories that we're going to come to a lot in Ballads of the Song of Solomon in these lyric videos. But this one uses the language of the door because he says, I will make the valley of Achor, where that happened in Joshua 7, I will make that a door of hope. That the place of your greatest defeat, sin, shame, compromise, and humiliation will actually be the threshold into glory and promises fulfilled and satisfaction and covenantal fidelity. That's your future. I'm gonna pull a Genesis 50:20, what, you know, evil meant to destroy, I'm gonna turn it into good, or Romans 8:28, that I will turn all things to good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. That's what he does with the Valley of Achor. And so The door is, as a song, it's theatrical, it's dynamic. You have our female lead, Audra, singing, Andrew singing, and then you meet the ensemble, which is like the voice of wisdom. They're woven throughout this project. So Andrew opens up saying, "From dust you came, to dust you'll go, but you're already poor, naked, and miserable." So we're leaning on Revelation 3, the letter to the Laodicean church. But come to the vineyard, come to the feast. There's bread and there's plenty. Fill your pockets unempty. That's Isaiah 55. But one thing that we will, again, come to often in this song, in this project, is Matthew 22, that the kingdom of heaven is like a wedding. The kingdom of heaven is like a king preparing a wedding for his son. And so there's a wedding hall to be filled, and there's a table to crowd out, and that's where we are now. That's the kind of the era that we're in. And then every verse will end with a refrain about the door. If you want more, you can get more. That's his invitation to her. And then you meet the ensemble, and they said, this is the chorus in the song, "Who has thread a camel through the eye of a needle? Who has crucified the cares that choke out the seed sown? Who has walked the narrow way despite all the trouble? If you want a surplus, then just seek first the kingdom." Obviously, who's thread a camel through the eye of a needle? Parable, the rich young ruler, he wants to go all in, but his heart is wedded to his stuff. And the Lord turns to his disciples and says, "I'll tell you what, it's harder to thread a camel through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to enter the kingdom. Because where your treasure is, there your heart is. And if you put all of your stock in your stuff, then you're ensnared by it. You're not free." And so I think that it's actually a really beautiful testimony that somebody with a lot of wealth can give the Lord, to say, you are better than wine, you're better than bourbon, and you're better than all my stuff. I had access to everything, and you were better. The supremacy of the Son of Man, again, is one of the central tenets of the song. Can you crucify the cares that will choke out the seed sown, right? Think of the parable of the sower. Walk the narrow way, do not depart from it. But then she responds with a verse that it's necessary narratively, but none of us want to sing this verse, but we all say it at some point. She says, "Suddenly we need to leave." He's inviting her to go do hard things, inviting her to come on the mountains, inviting her to go to the mountain of myrrh. And she goes, "Whoa, So this is just, it's written really harsh so that we can feel none of us want to say this. "Suddenly we need to leave. Are you so uncaring? You don't need to hike a summit just to be with me, right? Like, we could stay under the apple tree. You who can do anything, with God all things are possible. Do you hear what you're asking me? I know you'll split the sky one day, and you can come get me." Because she says, "Until the day breaks, until the shadows flee, go, my beloved, be a gazelle, go do your thing, go do the mountains. I'm going to sit right here." For a number of reasons. Maybe you turn the Lord down because you just want to be comfortable, or maybe it's because you want to go all in, but you're afraid, or you're reserved, or whatever. And the Lord is patient to, it says that like a little flame that's just fledgling. He takes care of it and he nurtures it. And you have to grow up. You have to grow up. He will not let you be a tiny little flame forever. He wants you to be blazing, burning, thriving. But she says to him, "If you want more, you can find more. You can turn out the door." And so he responds and says, "I can hear you singing in a not so distant day." We're winking towards that Hosea 2 thing, and a song that's later to come in the album. But right now you're choking on 1,000 other names. You're in compromise. "So I'll meet you in the desert, in all your barren place, and I'll speak tenderly to your deepest shame." That's that Hosea 2. If you want more, you can hope more. I will show you the door, and I have shown you the door, and ultimately he is the door. "If anyone enters by me, he will be saved. He will go in and find pasture." That's John 10. So that's the door.